Will, welcome. Thanks for coming up.
Appreciate being here.
Do you want to tell us about Will and your background and what you do and why does it matter and what we're going to get talking about today?
Well, I kind of fell into energy by accident, and I've been here ever since, and most of it's involved some form of smart metering, which is slightly worrying, as it's probably been about 15 years or possibly longer. But I used to work at E.ON, so one of the large energy suppliers in the UK, did various roles and things there, quite a bit around innovation, new product. So I remember trying to sell smart homes to people in 2011. Definitely our forecasts were way higher than the actual, and then transitioned into more kind of like a metering type role with one of the German parts of the business, and then did a bit of work at Siemens, working with energy retailers. And it's from there I kind of came across Eliq when we were about 10, 11 people. And I remember going for, I think, a coffee in London with Hawken. And I said to my wife, they're either going to want to try and sell into Siemens or they're going to offer me a job. And it happened to be the latter. So I've kind of jumped into a startup when we were like 10, 11 people from a large corporate, or having worked at two large German corporates. And that was quite a change, but I think quite good, because I lost some of that kind of overhead and bureaucracy that you typically get, and then the speed that you can go and impact change. And then I've been at Eliq now 5 years, which is also quite scary. We've grown to just over 50 people and had another round of funding announced a few weeks ago. So it's kind of scaling, and we've moved from just beyond our like original starting point of white label apps for utilities into kind of loads of energy insights for kind of still with our core market being utilities, but working with banks, looking at insurers, telcos, and kind of wider market verticals. So yeah, but generally speaking, it's all involved some form of smart meter data.
Great, thank you. And so just on energy insights, we touched on this in a previous podcast, but energy insights obviously driven by digital energy and smart meter data, and plays a massive role in helping a country and consumers to get onto that energy transition. And how do you Eliq? What does energy insights mean for Eliq?
I think if we go back to where Eliq started from, so originally we were sold a real-time monitoring device with a white label app as a consumer brand in IKEA stores about in 2012, I think, started a long time ago. And we actually shipped about 60,000 units, which isn't a too bad effort. But that was all about how do we take them or make the most of the Swedish smart meter rollout, which is already completed and they're on their second phase 10 years later, but we'll ignore that point. But broadly, it was like, how do you do more for customers? Because the first phase of this Swedish smart meter rollout, from my understanding, was quite DNO, DSO driven. Like, we need to put meters in to better understand the grid and bill accurately, not really anything for the customer. So Eliq was really formed about what can you do for the customer. And the actual monitoring device was called an Eliq, and the company was called Exivia. And then we realized that to make more change and help more people save on energy, we couldn't sell directly to consumers at that point, because to do that, you'd be competing with the likes of Google and things like that with Nest, but also just in terms of the capital needed to do the marketing side, right? That was a real challenge when you're like 10 people. So then it was like, well, how do we make the bigger impact? And then it was like, well, we'll work with utilities because they have much bigger customer range. Okay, that's great. So we've done that, got a track record of that. But actually, when we think about the wider reason that we're here, from a like helping on the climate crisis and helping homes and small businesses save money on energy, well, we need to go wider than that. So utilities is a great starting point for us, but ultimately it's about how do we get wider again. So we're working with some banks now where you can have one utility relationship, but you can have 10 different relationships with financial providers. So the reach is so much higher and the potential so much higher. And also, therefore, the opportunity for change is higher. And core to that is, how do we make energy simple? And how do we use the data in a way that, I think you were on a panel that we held in Paris a few weeks ago. A really good phrase was, with a low cognitive load for customers. So energy is really good at, here's loads of graphs and things that we can show customers, but how do we make it really simple for what's the next best thing that they can do? And that's where we see energy insights as driving. It's making sense of that energy data. So it's not just a usage graph and asking you to do all the heavy lifting. We're going to do that on behalf of you, so you know the things you need to do right now to make an impact. So that's kind of at the core of what we're doing. It's like, how do we get that scale and help homes and businesses take an impact on energy usage? And to do that, we need to make it simple for them so they take action. So you move away, if you think of that kind of product adoption curve, we want to move away from the early adopters and innovators. We want to get to the kind of mass market. How do we do that is by making it simple for them. That doesn't mean they have to think too much about it. So while time of use tariffs and loads of connected devices are great, we have to make that very simple for customers to do if we want the adoption to make a big impact.
Right. And I think that you touched on a really good point there around making sense of energy data, right? Because there is a huge amount of data available from the smart meters, but also from the type of properties that we live in and the type of properties that business have, how they use energy and how they engage with it. So I think the single biggest challenge we've got in the energy transition is going to be trust. And how does a business or a consumer trust that somebody is doing something with data and making a recommendation to do something, whether that's behavioral change or changes to retrofit in a house or something like that? How do we build trust? And I think an important part of that is to understand how energy insights is created. So what technology is behind it? How do Eliq do it? We talk about it's making sense of energy data, and you can do some incredibly clever things, such as I use several apps that have your APIs available, and they tell me how much I'm spending on my washing machine and cooking and things like that. But how does it work?
Yeah, I think trust is probably just a good starting point, and there's an element of transparency. So if you're going to make a recommendation for someone, you need to be able to show them what you're making the recommendation on, right? What's the starting point? And I guess getting them comfortable with what you're showing as a starter. So we use we call it energy usage categories, but it uses technically non-intrusive load monitoring. So basically it's disaggregation using just the energy data from the smart meter without the need for additional clamps or additional hardware. So the reason for that is we can get to scale because any market we work in Europe has smart meters, and we can run that in a 15-minute, 30-minute, hourly different models. And that's almost a starting point because you understand how much someone's spending on the heating as an example. So then any recommendations you make for heating saving is based on their actual heating usage or our estimate of their heating usage versus a generic turn your thermostat down 1 degree. Well, you've seen that message from everyone for a long time. So you're starting to make it more personal, and you can see why it's making the recommendation. Because if we compare your home, Tom, to others, you're spending definitely more on heating. And we can see, well, why? And then you can start to take action off the back of that. So using kind of machine learning to help break that energy into different categories, make recommendations, compare with others, and predict what usage will be, in that kind of way of making that simple with the customer. So we're not trying to get too complicated with how you want to show something in a UI UX. If some of our clients, we do that for them, like some white label, and others, we help them build around our API to do that. But ultimately, it's like, you don't need to make that too complicated. All right, what's the highest consuming area? And then what actions can you take off the back of that as well? So we have kind of our own data science team that kind of work and kind of improve those algorithms and make them available in different markets as well. But even on things like, for example, one of the challenges in loads of old installed PV systems is they haven't got inverters that you can connect to, or if they have, you maybe don't want to. So how do you understand what a home's producing? So, we can predict that based upon just the smart meter data and a couple of different algorithms, one to work out system size just based on the import-export data, and the other is like a weather model. So you can see what that system should be producing. So you can then start to make really good sense of how someone uses energy in the home without necessarily connecting things as a starting point. And maybe that's the entry to connecting more things and making them comfortable with what you're doing, that actually the data I'm getting from my utility or my bank is right. I'm happy with it. Then I'm going to start to build that trust to do more things.
I think thanks. That's really useful. I guess what's potentially slightly different in the smart meters in UK or Great Britain is that they hold up to 13 months worth of historic data, which we've talked about before. And that's really important because everything that you've described feels like it's a learning process, right? And you start to learn energy patterns and usage behaviors and things like that. But actually, with the benefits of understanding the profile of a house and immediately having access to all of that historic data, you can give almost an instant playback to those insights to the customer.
Yeah, it's a really important point as well, because we expect for good and bad, like instant feedback on decisions and actions that we take.
Yeah.
And some of those actions on home savings might not be immediate. So you have to do things that are in the moment. So our platform kind of runs on kind of real time. So if you update something or we get new data, we rerun everything. So it's not like an overnight process or something that's pretty clunky, because you need that from that customer experience point of view. You've just told me something about your home. I want to know the result I get back from that. But that also helps from a behavioral point of view, because you've got like a feedback loop. I've taken this action, I've got a reward for that action, however you define a reward. So that's a really important piece behind, from a, I guess, behavioral economics of taking action off the back of something that you've done and rewarding the customer for doing and giving them some data. I think one of the really things I always find a really good analogy is, I spend far too much time on LinkedIn, but it tells you how complete your profile is. And we see it's the same for the homes. We understand so much about homes across Europe that we just need a few things to understand your home. You've made that personal to you. It's not just your energy companies telling you about your home and you're compared to an average. This is compared to people like you, and these are the actions that you can take, and giving a result straight away with the learning that we've had across the platform across Europe, but also with the data we get back from the smart meters and using the historic data to drive that as well, so we can learn and keep improving for that individual. So the ML is then trained on you as an individual versus just a generic model.
That's ultimately what builds trust, isn't it? So that level of engagement and interaction with a business owner or a customer is what starts to build that trust with whatever brand, whether it's a white labeled app as you've described, or whether that is another large brand that already has a degree of a relationship with that customer, and they're adding more value and more services onto that relationship with Energy Insights and the APIs available. And that for me is, as I said earlier, that's absolutely key to taking a customer on a journey, is winning the trust and being to a degree energy supplier agnostic as well, because a big part of that transition will be to identify the most appropriate tariff for the customer as well, and also understand the profile of the house, how they use, or the building, and how they use energy, is absolutely essential to making any targeted recommendations on retrofit. And that's the niche bit, right? Is that ability to present a targeted proposition to a customer, not just one of these kind of Facebook ads or one of these social media ads that keep popping up telling me to get solar panels because it will save me £3,000 or whatever, right? Is actually, you can use that data, the insights, the engagement you've got with the customer to make those propositions tailored to the house, and to the usage of that energy and how they're using it in the home.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think we always approach things from the what we see from the data and understand about the home. There's other ways that people have tried to solve this recently. It was like based on an EPC or energy performance certificate or equivalent. But again, it's like, if you've ever looked at your EPC, it probably tells you the key things. If you haven't got solar, get solar. Insulate your walls. It's not particularly intelligent around what it's recommending. I know the reasons it is, but ultimately that's not based upon your actual usage. We're not using real data in there. We're just assuming based upon the building fabric. One of the key drivers on a return on solar is like, well, how you use energy within the home. So if you don't understand that, it's just a broad guess, or the customer inputs some data and you try and work it through. I think taking it from the approach where you have the real data versus just like an assumed EPC or an EPC is a way that you can make that really personal recommendation based upon your home. So if we're saying you're going to save, if we can see that you're working from home, I have solar on my roof. I don't have a battery, but I make the most of it when I'm at home because I know that I can see it. Obviously, it's a use case of one, but if you kind of extrapolate that out, well, if you understand how someone's behavior is in the home and what they use and when they use it, you can start to make those recommendations to make the payback on solar a lot better, and more accurate versus just being a generic save £3,000. Yeah. Or some of the ones I've seen one on an EPC once where I think it was telling to get double glazing and it had a really crazy low quote versus what it will actually be. And it's like, well, that's not going to help with trust if you're making a recommendation on something that's a few years out of date significantly. Well, okay, I've just got the quote. I thought it was going to be £5,000. It's actually going to be 20. I can't afford that. So I won't do anything and I don't trust it. So again, it's using the data to help really build that engagement and try and do the harder things, which is using the data versus just, using a generic EPC or something like that, which is especially important when we think about retrofit.
Great. And so just to build on that, we've talked about how you can use Energy Insights to drive retrofit solutions like solar panels and batteries and things like that. But there's obviously a significant saving to be had from just behavioral change, right? And understanding whether it's poor performing appliances in the house. I know when I first downloaded one of the apps, I pretty quickly worked out I had a problem with the immersion heater that kept coming on for 2 hours every night and used an awful lot of energy. So that's not necessarily a behavioral change, but that's identifying an immediate action that I can take with very little investment, right? And will make a big saving. But the behavioral changes and the change to how we use energy is really, really significant as well. Have you got any, I know you've got some kind of stats on what customers have saved in the past through just behavioral changes.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think it comes back to trust and giving customers some value to start with. If I think back to my Eon days trying to sell smart home in 2011, 2012, customers weren't there yet. And it was us basically going, we have this great smart plug solution. Do you want it? Right, that's not going to get any uptake. So how do you kind of get people to take smaller actions and get smaller wins to be able to then have the right to play in that kind of the retrofit piece? So, if I think on a UK perspective, and I was showing this stat last week, 16% of UK carbon emissions come from homes. So it's a massive area that we can impact. And we've got measured savings. We did a 3-year study in Norway, which was a 7% saving over 3 years, just on behavioural change, i.e. we weren't recommending solar to get installed. It was just on the savings there. And we also recently ran a pilot project with a client, which is now scaling out, where in month 1, I think it was like a 4% saving just on behavioural change. And after month 4, it was 10%. And that's versus a control group. So that's not against, they've saved more than they did last year, or they've saved more because everyone's been saving more. We're taking that into account. They saved an additional 10%. And if you think about that to that 16%, well, that's all behavioural change. Imagine the impact we have from a carbon point of view. If everyone in the UK saved 10% of their energy bills and saved 10% of the UK's carbon, right? That's a massive impact. And if we think about how we create value, we're B2B2C or B2B2B, depending on the type of construct. But ultimately, the end user or the customer has to get value, and they generally get value on the energy saving. Our client then gets value, and then we get value off the back of that by aligning the commercial model around there. So it flows the whole way through.
What about the level of engagement? So is this a flash in the pan exercise where somebody downloads an app, has a play for a month and gets bored, or have you got anything that shows that you get like longevity of relationship?
Again, we've done some long-term studies over a 5-year period, and we've seen engagement. And I think the key thing is how it changes, and I think also how you design for that. So if you think about, you get something new, you're curious and you want to find out more about it, so you should design the product to do that. Let them find out about things. Let's set a budget. Let's understand your usage. And then what you ultimately want is to get to the point where that just becomes how they deal with energy. And it was like a core driver for our energy clients or utility clients is, if I can have someone engaged and spending time within apps, then that's going to help in terms of a loyalty point of view, because that becomes the way that you deal with energy. And I think this is going to be more important in the UK in the kind of price cap world where there's less deviation in price. It's going to be a disservice in what you deliver versus someone's offering a £400 a year cheaper dual fuel tariff. So I think that experience is really important, and that experience of helping a utility transition from that energy retailer to and pretty much a utility. What you're offering really, you're not much. It's the same fundamental product to more energy services where you need to take customers on that journey. I think having the engagement's key. So we typically see, I think there's an Accenture stat, which 9 minutes a year customers think about energy. So we've seen that, per month. There's some variances depending on seasonality, time of year, which you'd expect. For example, in Northern Europe and the UK, you'll see more usage in the winter than you will in the summer. If you flip that to Southern Europe, more AC, you'll see people using quite a lot more in the summer. So you have that kind of variance based on region, geography, and time of year. But ultimately, we know across all the markets we're in, which I think is like 13, 14 across Europe now, we can see engagement. We know we can drive engagement, and then that's going to drive the business value and outcome for our clients, and that will change depending on their need and drive.
Yeah, great. So we've obviously been working together at SMS for a while now, mainly on the non-domestic market. So we launched a white labeled version of your app into the non-domestic market, sort of Q1 23, been really successful. And I think one of the things that we inadvertently unlocked there was that actually this wasn't necessarily just for the energy industry. So we're doing a lot of great work with non-domestic energy suppliers, and we'll talk more about that later. But I guess the exciting bit is that where we are opening up an opportunity for the SME market, and other players within the energy industry like TPIs and things like that, but also the SME market feels like they've kind of been left alone. There's a tech race to a degree to win the engagement of energy over the domestic customers. And for a long time now, consultancies and big firms have been after the very large businesses and the corporates to help them transition to net zero. But the SME market is a really interesting space because it's kind of in that difficult ground where it's very difficult to understand the profile of a building. Smart meters are starting to penetrate. We've also got AMR data that we can plug through to Eliq as well through our energy platform. But how do we accelerate that? How do we shift momentum further into the SME market and unlock that?
I think it's a really good. I think I always see SME and micro businesses, as you said, very underserved. You'll get a lot of solutions like coming corporates going down, which when you think about actually the buyer and the person that's maybe owning the shop or working in the shop, they're thinking more like a consumer because that's ultimately what they are. So I think that's definitely been underserved. There's definitely more complexities around building ownership and things like that for what you can do. But I think ultimately it's like we're emotional creatures as human beings, but there's probably a bit more logic sometimes in the business decision that comes along that as well. So again, demonstrating saving, making it easy and understandable is something that we think is really important, and understanding what they can and can't do within the building and how that some of that needs to be kind of unlocked. But ultimately, it's like thinking of them like more like a consumer, like a household versus a large corporate, and I think that's going to have an exponential impact in terms of firstly the engagement. So we know we can deliver the engagement, and then also on the benefits they can see. So what savings can they make that's going to impact their bottom line today? I always use the example, my mum runs a bookshop, and she has for nearly 50 years, which is quite scary because that also makes me quite old. But she employs maybe 4 or 5 people. She buys energy like a consumer, but she'll get targeted by old brokers and things like that trying to do things, and she hasn't got the bandwidth to think about it. So just something simple, an app that she can use, see what her usage is, take action on her usage is kind of what her need is. Albeit that's a use case of one, but there's like millions of SMEs, micro businesses in this country, in the UK and wider, that think the same way. And I think that's really important to engage them like a consumer, give them the experiences that they want as they expect as a consumer. And I think that's when you're going to get the change versus I've got these 20 dashboards.
Absolutely. I think for me, this is the opportunity for at kind of a GB country level to unlock that transition to retrofitting buildings and to behavioural change and winning a new level of engagement over energy that is not going to be the energy suppliers necessarily. And it goes back to trust and making sense of energy data and energy insights and things like that. And that's the massive opportunity that it feels like is just kind of teetering on the edge of success at the moment. And it's becoming quite a busy market as well. One of the things that I think energy insights driven by smart meter data is really powerful though, is that this isn't intrusive, so the availability of half hourly smart and advanced meter data is not intrusive. There's a lot of privacy and consent management that we go through, but beyond that, this is a very quick self-serve digital experience that's low cost, low effort to be able to start that journey and then ultimately start that relationship and win that new level of engagement.
Yeah, it's that kind of like small actions you can take quickly and the impact that has. I think, if we're thinking about the wider thing of kind of why we're here to help fight climate change, looking for the best ideal solution, always looking for that kind of what's a magic bullet or silver bullet. I don't think one ever exists, but there's the shorter term things like what can you do right now that's going to make an impact to buy you time to do more things. And I know there's a big focus on trying to drive more energy efficiency and things, but quite a lot of it's lacking data. It's we're trying to push something out. We need to do more of this. We need to do more of this. We'll try and find the right homes. What other things can you get them to do? And really think about that kind of engaging to take smaller actions and getting people comfortable with taking smaller actions and seeing the reward of the smaller actions they take, like tracking what they're saving is an example. Those kind of things are really powerful to start now and not wait. And then that buys time for more batteries to be deployed as an example to offer the challenges when you haven't got renewables available in the grid and things like that. So, acting is important, and there's things right now to act. And I think that's going to help there for households and small businesses for sure.
I guess beyond energy insights, why should another brand get involved in it, right? So for me, another brand could get involved in it to strengthen an existing relationship with a domestic customer or a business owner, and that could be the property market, could be banking, could be insurance companies, could be anything, right? And it also could be some big significant brands, right? Household name brands. But I think the over and above that level of engagement that you benefit from and a stickier relationship with customers, it's also a shop front, isn't it? The insights that are driven by energy data that will make recommendations on behavioral changes, but also some very quick wins, like some smart plugs and LED light bulbs and things like that. You can actually create a shop front and a digital marketplace for quick wins and to be able to do this as well.
Yeah, completely. I think we always see it as around that kind of, and I use the home as an example, but it's that kind of home energy transition needs to happen. There's a massive, I said 16% of UK carbon emissions. There's a big opportunity, and to do the right thing, but also to kind of win at doing that. And I think what we've seen through energy and wider is the open data hubs, the ability to get data with a consented flow, which is opening up the access to it versus it's kind of just utilities data, right? Similar to open banking's done for financial services, seeing the same in energy. And like smaller things, like if you're a retail store, you might be able to offer those products. That's an immediate benefit and smaller actions for people to take. But I think ultimately it's that kind of impacting around the home, and anyone that now wants to help people in homes or small businesses with what they need to do to transition, actions to take, the data is available. And that's really interesting and exciting because, as I said at the start, is like, how do you get that reach? Well, as I said, the utility has a limited number of customers. You only have one. But I could have, I said, loads of different relationships with financial services, a bank, current account, mortgage, loan, etc. But also other brands that you use. Insurance is another example. So if you want to do something around the home, the data exists there, and therefore the opportunity exists. And I think that's really like this kind of almost tipping point. I'd say probably, and my team and wider team at Eliq, probably like nearly half our conversations are with non-utilities now, which is always interesting because some of them you're trying to work through what their use case is and how it makes sense. But some it's really concrete, right? For example, we work with a large bank in Belgium, KBC, and they actually embed our products like an embedded web within their core mobile banking app for energy insights. And it's all around driving that home energy transition. Obviously, they want to finance that transition, but also actually that data, they all have to report on Scope 3 emissions. And if you have a mortgage book, that counts to your Scope 3 emissions. So how can you get better data to do better reporting on that? So there's really core, like fundamental things they've committed to the market that they need to report on that we can help with, whilst helping homeowners and helping put money back in customers' pockets, which is what they want to try and help them do, and that kind of financial literacy. So it's a great example of, and we're doing a few POCs with others as well across Europe as a starting point, because I think it's more new in that space, so you have to kind of prove the data points, but leveraging the experience we have working with I think like 33, 34 different utilities, using that experience into those kind of new verticals, I think is really exciting because I think it opens up so much more, but also it should drive change in the utility space, because does a bank have a better relationship with their customers than you do as an energy supplier? Does a big retailer have a better relationship with their customers than you do? So there's a danger if you're an energy company utility, you could just be kind of commoditized to death. I just want power and gas from you at the cheapest price. Thank you. Whilst right now, I think they've got an advantage of being ahead. That's something that I could definitely see changing over the next 5-10 years.
Yeah. For me, the exciting bit and where that becomes even more of a challenge for energy retailers, and energy insights plays a big part in is post the event and post the recommendation, right? So if you've got energy insights that are using smart meter data and driving recommendations to me, such as I should go and get a battery and a PV system, and I should get a heat pump and all of these kind of things, then that's great. It could also be the shop front for different solutions. So, there's some innovative funding models coming about now where it wouldn't necessarily mean that I need to go and find 15 grand to do this kind of stuff, but there's lots of options available. So you're using the platform and the insights to drive that recommendation, but post installation, you've made a promise to the customer to a degree that by taking these actions and investing in this, you're going to get X return, right? And that might be a reduction in my total cost of energy from 50 quid a month or something like that, right? Which is great. And then the introduction of assets, something that we've been really focused on in SMS, is how do you maximize the efficiency and the revenue streams that you can get out of those assets through flexibility markets, but also optimizing those assets aligned to the right time of use tariff, right? So I think there's two really important things. One is there is always a risk and a chance that we're going to recommend a different tariff, right? And I think that's where it becomes really important that we're not necessarily wedded to an energy retailer in this. And the other one is how do you convince somebody to hand control over these assets that you may have just spent £15,000 on or committed to a long-term finance agreement or something like that, right? How do I have enough trust in this app that tells me I should hand control over it so that somebody or some system can start controlling when my battery exports and fills up and things like that, right? So and that's really important, because if the longevity of a relationship is absolutely critical if we're going to continue to show value beyond that first few months of getting it, where assets are installed and I'm now at the point where I've forgotten about it and it's great, my energy bills are lower. How do you take the customer through that transition of time? Because there's a huge amount of change yet to come in this industry. Nobody really knows what energy prices are going to be like in 2 years' time, let alone 5 years' time. So, in fact, to be honest, nobody knows what they're going to be like in 3 months' time at the moment. So, how do we build that relationship up, we get that trust, and how do you maintain that level of relationship and engagement for a long time, so that you've got that maintained trust, control of assets, maintenance, optimization of assets, and all sorts?
I think the first point is, how do you get people to that state? And that's the trust in the first place. So we see our role with Energy Insights as getting more people to that state and wanting to take those actions. I think innovative funding models remove one of the biggest barriers, which is generally upfront cost. People might be able to pay as you save, or you pay less than you'd be making the saving, or be able to pay an amount per month. And if you take the first example, you have to be able to demonstrate the saving. So using the data to go, great job, you've got your heat pump or your solar panels and battery, this is how much you saved this month. So you need to keep prompting and nudging people that you're doing well, you're doing the right thing, and rewarding them for that behavior. But also, I think you need to tell them things are wrong. You can be aware of things, or we're doing quite a few things in Europe where you've got day ahead pricing, it's going to be higher. There's energy prices are going to be through the roof tomorrow. These are things not to do at these points of time. So it's kind of transitioning away from that discovery early interest phase, which you probably want when they get that new technology, to kind of peace of mind. You're keeping them in control of what's going on. You're telling them what they're saving. Maybe it's just like a push notification every month saying, congrats, this is how much you saved this month. This is what we think for next month. This is your highest consuming category. And these are the other actions you can take. So you're still reiterating that kind of message, and look for other consumer facing companies for how they kind of keep driving the engagement high and keep things being relevant. You kind of like your Netflixes or your Spotify's. Maybe Spotify's not the best to talk through right now, but that kind of nudges for things you're doing, and because they know the more you keep using things and getting value, the more you'll keep coming back to then get more value. So that's really important. So Energy Insights is almost like it's the kind of the gateway drug that gets people there. And once they've had that installed, it's the way that you can keep demonstrating that value to be able to offer potentially more things off the back of that as well. And I think I was in an event a few weeks ago and talking about how do you predict the future, looking into crystal ball. We don't know exactly what prices will do, but I don't think they're going to drop to any material level to make a difference. Therefore, if you look at the positive from that, then if they go higher and you've just got solar and battery, you're going to get a much better payback and much better return of what you've done. Because I don't think we're going to get anywhere near the levels we had a few years ago, given what needs to happen from an investment point of view. And we should always therefore prepare for kind of black swan type events, and how do you react to that? Because we don't know what it will be, but there'll be maybe oil price goes up, everything else increases. But again, it's almost reaffirming that doing the right thing for renewable technology in the home or a small business is really important, because it just makes the payback even better at that point in time. And probably drives adoption again, because you've got an event that drives the reaction. What could I do to prevent it next time? And we don't always think that way as human beings. We sometimes think about that what's just in front of us. I think that's how we're designed to survive from millennia ago. But that kind of kick, that going, oh, energy prices have gone up, I wish I had got solar last time. Okay, I can go and do that now, because it's going to happen again. It's that kind of reaffirmment of what's been going through.
Look, it sounds fantastic. I think just to strip it back to basics a little bit then. So what does a customer practically need to have to be able to tap into this space of energy insights? I mean, clearly they need to have a smart meter. And I think at the moment, we're as a country, we're in Great Britain, we're sort of 60% there. So we've got a long way to go yet. This is, I hope the message comes across that this is another reason why you should get one. And is there anything else?
I think that's the key one. I think there's even things we can do without that, because we understand that much about home energy data. So actually for KBC Bank in Belgium, they've only rolled out smart meters in one of the 3 grid regions, which I think is Flanders. We actually then, well, how do you can't just serve a third of your customers as a bank and you don't know who those customers are at that point. It's not a data point they captured. You have a smart meter. So we actually created like an ML model that based on the attributes you pretty much capture in a mortgage application, we can predict down to a daily level what home energy usage will be. So it's not the same as the real smart meter data. You lose some of that granularity, but as a starting point, you can start to show some things like how you compare with others, how others have taken recommendations like you. So you've even got a starting point before that for the markets where there aren't the smart meters. Also thinking in the wider parts of Europe, thinking Germany, where they're finally slowly getting towards doing smart meters. What can you do right now? Again, back to making an impact on savings at this point in time. There's things we can do there to support the acceleration of smart meters in the markets where they're not deployed. But also, if you can't get access to it for whatever reason, there's other things that could be used to get to a kind of a full broad base of a customer base, especially if you're thinking you're not a utility in control of that smart meter rollout. You need to be able to serve all your customers or people that may want to use the service. So you have to have some way of solving for that.
So we've talked about the technology. We've talked about the ability to the vehicle to get this into the customer's palms to a degree. But just to build on that, what is ultimately reliant on, especially in your model, is for a B2C or a B2B facing brand to take this energy insights into their customers, right? So whether that's, as you said, white labeled, which is something that we work with you on, or whether that's taking your APIs and embedding that into existing infrastructure and apps that the brand may have. Who's doing this? Who's gonna play that role of being the vehicle into consumers' houses and palms of their hands to show them the insights?
I think it's what we've seen interest working with some banks already. We're working with some large kind of retailers that do kind of home furnishing, kind of renovation type things. Working with some switching sites not in the UK, but other markets. Those that want to do that impact, do something around the home and have almost like a right to play in that and are seen as that from the customer. From a bank's point of view, you have a mortgage with the bank. It's like probably like your biggest kind of outlay or financial relationship, right? As an example. So that's one. And there's obviously benefits it drives from them as well. I think ultimately, if you want to play a part in that home and understanding how people, manage their money in a home, even if you take the energy out of it, well, what's the reason that people want to make savings? It's probably to put more money back in their pockets. Energy price bills have gone up again. The price cap's increased. We haven't got the protection that we had last year. There's a massive squeeze on mortgages in terms of interest rates have gone up. So people are out of pocket. So if you think about helping people manage their money in their home, even that actually is another way of thinking around it. Because, you always talk about, people don't care as much about kind of climate and carbon. Well, if the two are intrinsically linked from an energy point of view. If I save £10 on my energy bill, I've also saved carbon, and I've not thought about the carbon. And some people think more about that. And I think it's the two pieces are very, very linked. And I think the way to get scale is to link them and keep linking them. It's not making it too much about kind of just from a carbon save the planet point of view, because some people it doesn't appeal to, but some people will do it if they're saving money in their pockets, and some people don't believe in climate change but if you told them you could save £200, they probably would do that. So you can probably address that across different segments of people quite easily by thinking around it's how do you manage your home and your expenses within the home. And this is an interesting way of thinking around it, because we're not just seeing it from the energy point of view and carbon point of view, but just in terms of how you budget in the home and how do you save money in the home. And the economics on PV and a battery make sense, especially if you take up the upfront cost.
That's a really interesting point about carbon as well. And because you've got a number of features in the app that we use. One of them is kind of grid intensity. So you can kind of get a live view of how carbon friendly the grid generation is at the moment. And then another one, of course, is budget and cost. What's it actually costing me at the moment? And then the insights piece and the disaggregation and breakdown to where that energy is being spent. What I said earlier, whether it's on washing or cooking and things like that. What is it that customers are actually looking at from your point of view at the moment? Are people really worried about the carbon footprint and having a real look at that, or is it mainly just costs?
I think for mass market, its cost is probably the main driver. I think that's probably the right hook. You will have some customers, and we partner with a carbon tracking company, Kogo, where you have customers that are more engaged around that. But I think for the mass majority or the early majority, I think cost is probably an immediate driver right now, given the other factors from the kind of economy that's impacting. So it's around how can you save, where am I saving, actions for that, like how much am I going to save by taking this action? Those are all the kind of things that we're seeing kind of engagement around. I think carbon and grid intensity as an example is really important because, despite being on, like, there's some suppliers where they obviously PPA back things, but others is like it's 100% renewable. It's like it's not really. It's like you've just bought certificates. So actually aligning the time that people use is important, but I don't think people are quite there yet at scale. I know the DFS events and flexibility is really interesting and are starting on that way, and we see that kind of evolving not just in the UK but in Europe and wider. But I think it's still there's a cost element, and I think if you can get to a point where that cost element you on a DFS program is significant on the saving, I think again that's going to drive more kind of uptake and get people to think about when they're using things, as well as like what they're using, for example.
You just touched on DFS then, and that's a really interesting point, because one of the things that we're doing together at the moment is launching our smart energy data platform, which is driven by Eliq, with in partnership with FlexiGrid, our product that serves the demand flexibility service. And I think that's a really interesting way of tapping into that level of engagement and doing more with it, right? So the app is there to serve a purpose of showing businesses where they're spending their money and give them some insights as to how to reduce their cost, right? But what we've done with that level of engagement is use the platform via its push notifications and events and alerts and things like that to offer that ability for a business to sign up to demand flexibility service. So we've spent a lot of time today talking about how you can use insights to drive the retrofit angle, and then post the retrofit, how you then engage on flexibility. But clearly, as insights, we talk about behavioral change. The demand flexibility service from National Grid is behavioral change, right? So yes, if you've got a battery, it's great. You can set your battery up to export everything in that event window. But what's really powerful is combining that level of insights that drives behavioral change with a service like DFS on a digital platform with push notifications, events and alerts, is really, really compelling. And I think there's real promise there that DFS could be a significant part of the future grid flexibility over the next few years, and potentially some wind up things in the summer as well. So another great use case, I think, of using insights for more than just behavioral change.
Yeah, I think completely. It's changing behavior in a different way. And it's using the data to drive that. Like, can you see what people are using? Are they using a load at that point in time? What's that load? Can we identify that as well? I think we already do kind of, other European markets are more ahead on day ahead pricing as an example, like probably 50% of customers in the Nordics are on day ahead and aware that you win and lose on that. If you just went on day ahead now, well, in the energy crisis, it would have been pretty bad. You haven't got the period of winning. But I think when people use is really important, and giving them notifications well ahead of time, what they're likely to use within that period is quite powerful. And I think we'll see that evolving more and more. And I think hopefully if you think about, if we see other people doing it, simple recommendation could just be, similar homes to you of save this much through this. Do you want to sign up? So you're playing into that kind of social context and social grouping. I think that's quite powerful, I think, as well, to keep driving that forward. And we've seen DFS increase this year to last year as an example as well, right? So I think it's going to keep doing the same, and more people will signing up. And I think making that available, if you think on scale on scale, making that available wider than just utilities, I think is also really exciting. When you have going, well, actually, you've just got solar panels and battery, but actually now if you join this program as well, you can save even more at these points in time. Again, it's reiterating that you're doing the right thing and you're going to save from it, and we're showing you what you're saving from that as well.
Yeah, brilliant. We touched a lot on trust and engagement, but actually it's education as well, isn't it? So a lot of what we've talked about today has been taking a customer on a journey, right? And that journey starts with some behavioral changes, and it potentially finishes with a full retrofit and getting solar panels and batteries. And then beyond that, the level of engagement and trust that you get on optimizing those assets that you've put in the home. You asked me this question on a panel a couple of weeks ago.
I'm trying to remember what I asked now.
Well, I'm going to return the favor now. What do you think 2030 looks like for Eliq and Energy Insights, and where do you think we're going?
From an Eliq point of view, I think we'll be working with a lot of non-utilities. Given where our focus is and lots of conversations, early stage pilots, trials within new verticals, I think that's opens up a lot more. I think as a company we'll be a lot bigger. I expect to serve that and serving different verticals. But I think also we in our monthly sessions, we, as it like all hands, like we have a monthly energizer call, and we say, based upon the live active customers we have, what's the energy we saved and carbon we saved based upon like size of towns in Sweden. So I'd like to think in 2030 we're well beyond Sweden in terms of we're past Stockholm, we're past Gothenburg, we're into maybe London territory. So that kind of reach is really important. And I think, there's a lot of talk about like different dates, and obviously there's COPs going on at the moment as well. But I really think we need to have had more of an impact, not just Eliq, but in terms of the industry, on what people are doing like here and now. Not just talking about things that could happen, but actually acting on it. And that needs a bit more kind of change from, there's loads of targets and it's easy to say something by 2050 or 2030. Well, 2030 is not that far away when you think of it. It's kind of getting there quickly, and action needs to happen before that point. So yeah, I think lots more players in the space that want to do things around the home. And there'll be definitely more uptake of technology to enable that. But that's partly driven by kind of being innovative with financing and how we structure things. So it's not just those that are able to pay that cover it. And I think also one thing I haven't really touched much on is EVs. Again, that's like a controllable load potentially within the home. As that becomes more and more people have an EV and it's the easier thing to do, or you're on a company car scheme, it's the cheapest option. Then again, that drives the ability to have people with more controllable load, and want to understand more about energy. As data we've seen, and this is going back a few years, is if you have anything that's high energy intensive in the home, be it PV system or EV, you spend a lot more time engaging, as in dwell time around energy.
Great. I think you're right. I think technology is going to play a massive part, right? Especially in your landscape, with everyone seems to be talking about how AI is going to change everything, and a lot of the stuff that you do is at the moment is kind of AI, machine learning based and stuff like that. But I think the biggest single change and the biggest single shift that we're going to see is who takes the customer on that journey. And for me, that I agree that we've for a long time engaged in energy with our energy suppliers and who we buy energy off, but we're not talking about buying energy anymore, are we? We're talking about how do we manage the energy that we need, and how do we buy as little of it as possible, right? So it's complete mindset change, and I think there is. I certainly agree with you, and I expect some pretty significant brands to come in to this space, and that could be asset manufacturers, heat pump manufacturers, EV battery manufacturers, but I think there's also a big challenge we've got in terms of like interoperability and interchangeability of these assets as well. What we don't want to create is an environment where you take a customer on a journey and you end up with 10 different apps to manage your PV, your battery, your EV, your energy supplier app, and flexibility services and all sorts, right? So there's a lot of change going on elsewhere in the industry that we're really focused on at the moment, that looks at how do we how do we address interoperability and interchangeability of assets? But for me, there is a massive opportunity for a large brand to come into the homes that have already got a degree of trust and relationship, start to play in this energy space, and this is their platform to grow their customer base more potentially, but also have stickier relationships. And I think you're right, banks and significant household brands are going to really play a big part in that.
Yeah, so we're live with one bank at scale now, KBC. We're also live with a large retailer that I can't name, which I think is going to be quite exciting in terms of what that means, because everyone knows who they are, and they're global. And back to that kind of reach and impact, that's kind of what we're looking for as well now. It's like utilities that have got that reach in different markets, but also those kind of larger brands or banks where they have that customer relationship and have an element of trust around how they manage money and manage things around their home or what you have in your home. I think that's where it gets really interesting, and leveraging all the levers to get that technology into home. So financing it, how you show someone they're getting the value from it, and using data to drive that. And obviously you mentioned AI, but that just should be part of how we do business nowadays. It shouldn't be a thing that needs to come. It's like that just should be just the norm. Obviously there's some different challenges to manage if you're thinking about having that embedded in a contact center, what it's going to tell staff to say and things like all those kind of things around it. But ultimately it's like it should just be, that's just how we do business now. It's not like a new thing that's coming, and I think that's a shift which I think is happening for sure.
One of the final things I'd like to touch upon is how do we maintain pace, right? So Eliq have been going 5-6 years. How do we at the moment it's not a very competitive market in this space. It's definitely coming, right? And things like AI will make that even more significant. But how do you maintain pace, right? How do you continue to innovate? What tips and tricks do you use as a business to be able to continue to be at the forefront of this?
I think it's always kind of probably being that kind of startup, keep never losing that kind of startup mentality. Like how can you do things differently? How can you do things faster? You're going to get obstacles. Obstacle is the way, right? So how do you work around it? Because that, ultimately, if you just go by what you can and can't do right now, you're not going to get there. So there's definitely an element of just maintaining speed. And from our point of view is obviously have competitors, not focusing too much on them, focus on the outcomes. And we know by doing that, we'll succeed and we'll help our clients succeed. So I think it's that kind of needs to be kind of ingrained in, but I think it's also, if you're a large corporate, be a utility, bank, retailer, how do you keep actually being innovative and driving change? And innovation can be an overused word in some of those organizations, but ultimately it's like, how are you able to impact change on your organization? So it's not just, we're playing around with something. This is fundamentally core for how we need to operate next year, in 5 years, and in 10 years. I think that's really important. But I think what we see at Eliq right now is almost at a tipping point of we'll start to work with more banks, more non-utilities. That's going to make it easier to then work with more banks. If you're already working with 2 or 3, that's easier to work with the next 10. So you're building that referenceability to go, others are already doing it, in particularly risk averse, or utilities is generally risk averse because there's like downsides from the core old business if you weren't risk averse, right? Same with banks. You don't want to help someone lose all their money. So you need to kind of play within those constraints. But there's definitely the kind of the speed needs to happen if you're going to hit back towards targets that they've all committed towards doing.
One of the things I really enjoyed doing with Eliq were when we created a new feature for the SME market in a group portfolio view, was the format we used was kind of a hackathon, wasn't it? So lots of brilliant minds behind the team at Eliq that are kind of freed and enabled to kind of get into a room full of whiteboards and think and come up with ideas. And I think that's absolutely key, right? And we see that particularly from the energy front, N3RGY. We see so many startups and even before pre-startups, right? So we were talking last week to a couple of guys that are fresh out of university and want to try things in this space. And that's massively important to us, because that's where you maintain that pace of innovation, and I think things like hackathons and continuing that relationship we have in that mindset is really important.
Yeah, I think it's just, I guess creative thinking needs time, and you need to think it through and you go through. But I think being in present, working through things, whiteboarding it. We do an annual one as a company all hands. It's a really good way of, I see a lot of people on like video calls, speak to them a lot, but actually in person is really good and powerful. But real focus for the previous ones have been like, what can we actually take into the business? So we do this, you spend 2-3 days, caveat, I can't code. So I make the case and do some nice slides and have some ideas, but then how do we take those forward? And it's trying to do that with our clients as well as yourselves. So we, get together, think things through, what kind of problem areas and working that through. And I think just trying to kind of, we're generally the startup scale up, bring that energy to our clients in terms of what they can do and what's the art of the possible. And then trying to work about how you kind of work through different organizational guardrails that exist for a reason, but we obviously need to kind of speed things up and accelerate. So understanding what we need to do and how do we work around it and work with it versus, oh, this says no. Because I think that's the default sometimes.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Will. Really, I've really enjoyed the chat. I think it's this is a real key ingredient, right? Beyond the enablement of energy data from smart meters and stuff like that is obviously critical, but a real key ingredient in taking customers on that energy transition, right, is smart insights. But more importantly, beyond that transition, continuing that level of engagement and making sure that a customer is seeing the value back and seeing the savings back and keeping that relationship is again fundamentally down to energy insight. So really fascinating. I look forward to continuing working with you.
Yeah, sounds good. Really appreciate the chat.
Cheers, Will. Thanks. If you'd like to hear more from energy experts and innovators, please like, follow and subscribe to Energy Matters podcast.